Please welcome to the stage, Janet Peace, Head of Policy, Anew Climate.
You're supposed to be walking to the stage right now.
Okay. Is this working? No. Hello.
We need mics.
It is mic.
I've got a mic.
My mic is not working. Is it working? No.
Mine is on.
Kind of, sort of, maybe. Hello. Hey, maybe if you guys can't hear in the back, actually, why don't you guys move up? This is a big room. Looks really half empty. Come up.
It does. It looks
We're
mostly
friendly.
empty, if I'm honest. If I can see.
Really, we mean it. Come on up.
I mean, I always sat in the back at university, but this isn't that, because I'm going to actually quiz you. So it's better if you're closer than if you're far away. Want to do this?
I think it's working. I actually think it's working.
Hi.
Thank you.
That's much better. So I'm Janet Peace. I'm the head of policy for Anew Climate. Really happy to be here to talk about the VCM standards and oversight. If you're here to talk about forestry, you're probably in the wrong room. But we're going to talk about standards. I would say it's great to see so many people I know, but I can hardly see because of the lights. But I know there are a lot of friends in the audience. I love this conference because there are friends, and it's just a very safe and welcoming people who like climate and like carbon markets. I think we should be happy about that. So this session is really going to deal with, some of the issues you may have heard about with the standards. And I mean, it's not surprising that these standards have come into play. I mean, there's been a lot of concern about greenwashing, a lot of concern about the quality of carbon credits. And so we were seeing, like, the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, ICVCM for short, the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative, VCMI, Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTi. It's like alphabet soup. But these standards have all arisen because of these concerns about quality and concerns about greenwashing. This session is going to take a broad look at these standards from the perspective of users of these standards. And when I say users, I'm talking about the perspective of a registry who has a whole host of requirements under the ICVCM, from a carbon credit advisor who is trying to decide on the credibility of a carbon project, and then also from the perspective of an investor and a retailer in the market. So this is from the perspective of users of these standards. So I know that Craig Ebert needs no introduction, former president of CAR, Climate Action Reserve, Spencer Meyer, Chief Ratings Officer for BeZero, and Jen Jenkins, Chief Science Officer for Rubicon Carbon and co-chair of the Business Alliance for Climate Action, a little industry coalition that we put together to defend the carbon market. How many in here have heard the term Wild West? Yeah, a few, huh? I still hear it. I have a belt buckle. I think it says carbon cowgirl or something like that. So this term Wild West has been around for a long time. And I think that's because, for a long time, there was no generally accepted guidelines or governance for how to create a carbon project or how to make a good climate claim. So people were just kind of winging it. They were trying to do their best, but we've had, since I've been in this market, the evolution of the registries. We now have several registries out there that, create the methodologies. They continually update them. These methodologies are science-based. They're not just willy-nilly. They put together programs for how to verify, how to validate, how to ensure that these methodologies are fit for purpose. But nevertheless, we're seeing, I think today, I counted 45 registries out there. So we have registries that don't do third-party verification. They create their own methodologies, they create their own credits, then they're selling them, there's no third party. That's the piece that gets me these days. There's no third-party review at all. So each one of our registries, they do something a little different. Their methodologies are a little different. They have different areas of focus. I think there's a lot of confusion in the market. I think there's a lot of hesitation about getting stuck with a crummy credit. And it's easy for a buyer not to know how to start. Am I going to screech? It's okay. No screeching allowed. Oh, good. Okay. All right. So anyway, with all this concern and fear, if you will, of doing the wrong thing or picking the wrong credit and getting, lambasted in the press of greenwashing or using credits, I think it's not surprising that we are seeing these standards pop up. And they're not easy. These guys put a lot of work into these standards. So I'm not minimizing the effort that goes into these. But I think what we're going to talk about today is, are these standards fit for purpose? Are they doing what we want them to do? Are they barriers to action or enablers of action? It's a question for you guys. Do you think, ICVCM, VCMI, the whole alphabet soup, do you think these are working? Is there anybody who thinks they're working? Even a little bit, come on. A little bit, thank you. Come on, we can give them a little credit, because this is not easy, this stuff. So now that's a question for the three of you. So Spencer, why don't you start? Why don't you tell folks a little bit about BeZero?
Sure.
And then you think these standards writ large?
Happy to do that. Thank you, Janet. You looked at me earlier when you introduced me and said something about, and we have carbon advisors. And just to clear that up, we're a ratings agency, and I'll talk more about sort of the importance of independence in the ratings agency. I'll talk a lot about that. In fact, I just want to make sure that was clear. Thank you. You mentioned the Wild West metaphor, which is actually great, because yesterday I was in a panel and we were talking about why ratings exist in the broader world, in the credit markets and the public debt markets. And during the literal Wild West, the 1850s in the United States, credit ratings agencies were born because Henry Poor was the editor of a journal all about railroads. Back then it was like highly fragmented. There were all these local owners of railroads. They were getting loans from their local banks. There was no large-scale investment, but as they were trying to bridge the East with the actual Wild West of the day, they were looking for much bigger investment, and a lot of that was coming from Europe, and there was no standard way to understand who you were investing in. And so, Poor started this journal, and then later Moody came along with a new innovation, and Fitch all those three names, Standard & Poor's, Fitch, and Moody's, all had their roots in providing clarity and confidence and transparency around the railroads as they were scaling up and getting investment at bigger and bigger scales. And so if you think about the formation of market development, the carbon markets have been around for a few decades now, and many people in this room have been there since the beginning. But we are still in the early days, the formation phase of this market. And so ratings are emerging to be one of these pieces of critical market infrastructure. So BeZero Carbon, we're the global ratings agency for the carbon markets broadly, and we are building this infrastructure. We're building these tools, which are most known for our ratings, our project level ratings that focus on the outcomes and the risks associated with delivering 1 ton CO2e avoided or removed for every credit that is being claimed by a project. And we'll talk more about that later, but the key thing to know is that we use a AAA down to a D rating scale, just like the public credit markets use. And that scale was established in the early 1900s, 1920s, I think it was. So we are following in the long footsteps of other markets that have established and relied on credit ratings. And we are bringing that to the carbon markets, and I'm looking forward to the conversation about how all these standards that are evolving rapidly and bringing a lot of improvements to the market are very much complementary to what we're doing at BeZero Carbon.
Okay, not an advisor, but you help people.
Clarity. We like to be helpful.
Good. Okay, thank you. You're next, Craig. What do you think? I mean, you're accredited by the ICVCM?
That is correct.
Or SIA?
Spencer was just making some good points about why we need more clarity in the market. I would like to call out, though, that there's clearly what I'll call bottom feeders who don't follow elaborate, high-quality procedures for generating credits. I will gladly, point to the Climate Action Reserve that brings high-quality credits to market. Now, that sounds self-serving, but functionally, I'll clarify why. Being originally a creation of the California legislature, we continue to follow transparent public sunshine laws in how we conduct our business. What does that mean? It means anybody in this room, anybody on the planet for that matter, who has an interest in an outcome of a protocol can participate in the process, pro or con. It often takes us a year or two to bring something to market. We're not doing it behind closed doors. Everything is public, everything is recorded. You can go on our website and listen to it all, and that's critical because you're only going to get a high quality outcome if you're getting all the alternative viewpoints feeding into the process. And I think also on top of that, clearly being separated from the project developer community at arm's length is critical. Another key part of the triad is having verifiers out there operating independently whose job is to understand what our protocols say and to ensure that the project developers are following that. And of course, it's our ultimate responsibility to ensure that both the project developer and the verifier are following what's stated in the protocol. But none of this is happening behind closed doors. And that gets us to the importance of how do we begin to discern quality in that market? And the Climate Action Reserve has embraced the ICVCM. Why? Because there is chaos in the market. Some of it justified with what I'm calling those bottom feeders. Some of it, some chaos just created by what I also call just chicken little critics who don't know what they're talking about. And we need a global organization that's, we all have confidence in that's defining that. And I think we will talk about some of the pros and cons of the ICVCM. My take on it is they have to succeed. If they don't succeed, we descend back into the jungle for a few more years until we figure out what's the right path forward. And so having them succeed and provide clarity to the market will help that market maturity that Spencer was mentioning. I think that we've made a lot of progress in that direction, but there's a need for clearer guidance to the marketplace, but also a clearer way to sort out, quality from non-quality in the market. And when I refer to some of the chicken little critics out there, it's very infuriating to me that when we go through that collective process that I've just described, where all of us can participate in, it's a multi-year process involving hundreds of people and hundreds of peer-reviewed articles. Somebody sits up in their attic late at night, writes an article and gets Bloomberg or ProPublica to publish it, and suddenly that's being equally balanced with our work. And I've often been asked to comment on that a day or two before they want to go public with some article. They won't share the article, they won't share the research. It's an untenable position to be in, and it's ridiculous, but that's a lot of the confusion happening in the market right now. So, bringing it back to ICVCM, there are growing pains in any organization, but the mission is a good one, the outcome is a good one, and we're being supportive of it. Don't always agree with them, but they've got their own challenges, and I think that's why we feel like ultimately they have to be successful.
So Jen, what do you think? Are they working?
Yeah. First, let me just introduce myself and Rubicon before we kind of leap into that important and thorny question. Jen Jenkins, Chief Science Officer, Rubicon Carbon. Rubicon is fairly new in the market. We are a vertically integrated carbon credit investment and management firm. We came out of stealth mode in late 22. So we've been only around for 2.5 years now. And I've been Chief Science Officer since the beginning, together with and I work closely with our CEO, Tom Montag. To your question, somebody said yesterday, and I thought this was a fantastic phrase, that the voluntary carbon market is undergoing an integrity renaissance. And I love that, right? I think that's actually exactly true. And I think it's important, as you said, to support ICVCM and VCMI because they are really sort of standard bearers, I think, for that integrity renaissance. I do think it's important to have sort of a baseline of quality, to your point, because we need to acknowledge that the market hasn't always been perfect, right? But at the same time, I think we need to acknowledge that this isn't your grandfather's carbon market. Things have changed, right? And things will continue to change and evolve. And one of the things we really need to get comfortable with, generally, as both sort of investors and as scientists, actually two things. We need to get comfortable with risk, because there's risk everywhere. There's always risk, right? No matter what your project, I don't care how good your project is, there are going to be risks, right? And the key is managing those risks. And then I think the other thing we need to get comfortable with is that standards will evolve. Science will grow, right? The first carbon projects were developed in 1988. We didn't even have Google Earth at that point, right? So let's keep that in mind when we try to compare sort of the 1988 methodologies against, you know, the sort of 2024 tech that we have, right? Because they're fundamentally two different things. We need to be comfortable with change and evolution, and we need to be comfortable with risk. I think ICVCM and VCMI are making steps toward that. I'm concerned, I don't think enough people understand and know about the VCM 2.0, right? This integrity renaissance that is happening and has sort of taken place in the market. And I think that's, if there's a problem with ICVCM, it's that we haven't, or they haven't, or somebody, you know, not enough people know about it and understand what it's doing for the market.
I mean, that's a good point. I mean, John Oliver talks about, let's just create a registry and we'll just create a bunch of carbon credits. Like, that's not exactly how it works. I mean, there are some bottom feeders, I like that term, that have done things maybe a little dodgy. Maybe they're just trying to be innovative too. You know, there's some out there that are just trying to do and get things going. So that's important to realize as well. Let me just ask you, Spencer. So rating agencies and the ICVCM, do you always agree? So ICVCM says, bless this methodology? Do all of your ratings say, oh, okay, you're good? How does that work?
No.
That's an easy answer. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think one of the fatal flaws of Carbon Market 1.0 from our perspective is that there was this assumption, something we all wanted to believe, that 1 ton was equal to 1 ton. If a methodology said it was producing a ton, we could take that to bank and say, yep, it's a ton. But I think we know now it's just simply not true, even if we wanted it to be. And that's okay. There are going to be flaws, there are going to be imperfections, and that is not necessarily a problem. Like Jen said, it's about identifying the risk and managing the risk. The public markets, the markets know what to do with risk. They've been doing this for a very long time. It's about understanding it, identifying it, and pricing it in. And so that's where ratings is coming in at the individual project level. So ICVCM is doing really great work on bringing up this minimum threshold of what is even allowed in the market in the first place, or what should be allowed in the market. And that's happening on a very methodical, very deliberate timeline that will pay dividends in the long run. We are in the midst of this transition to the renaissance, the integrity renaissance. And I believe that will play out and benefit everybody here, most importantly, the climate. In the meantime, however, we see a lot of variation in individual project risk. So we have rated nearly 500 carbon projects globally. Those are all available on our platform. The headline ratings are available free of charge because we believe the ratings are public good. We know the market is trading on our ratings increasingly more often, and we know the strong price signals I'll maybe talk about a little bit later. But I think this idea that a ton is a ton is outdated, frankly, and I think our ratings and other ratings agencies are helped to bring that to light. Directly to your question, the CCPs so far, of all the projects that they've approved in the energy, household devices, a few other sectors, of all of those categories at the methodology and standard level, there are 26 projects only that we have actually rated. We rated them beforehand, we haven't rated them in response to. So 26 projects that we've rated that are now in the cohort of CCP approved ratings, methodologies, and those range from an A to a B. So remember I said we go from AAA to AA to single A to triple B to double B to B. And so of those 26 projects, even among this floor that ICVCM has now set for those categories, we see this range of a single A down to a B. And we fully expect that will continue to be true because having done 500 of these ratings, we know very well that even within the very same methodology, you can have very significant range in risks and conversely quality.
Have you ever given a good rating to a project that ICVCM has rejected the methodology? And how do you explain that?
Yes, although the good is in the eye of the beholder. I mean, there's lots of different risk appetites through this market. Just like in the credit markets, right? You know, we hear about junk bonds. Like, that's a thing. There are people that invest in junk bonds. There's people that invest in high-grade AAA bonds only. And so there's varying risk appetites. So what is a good rating is in the eye of the beholder. We do not at BeZero make a distinction of what's investable, investment grade, and what's not investment grade. We hear a lot from the market what those thresholds are, but we don't think it's our place to sort of cut that off. We do have quite a few projects that have been rejected at the methodology level that we believe have produced relatively low-risk projects in the A's and high B categories. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but there are quite a few of those. And those are projects that our project-level risk analysis would say are quite likely to be additional and have relatively conservative carbon accounting and a very high probability or moderate to high probability of producing 1 ton CO2e avoided or removed, but yet did not make the grade at the methodology level. So that highlights this distinction between those.
Can I add to that, Jenna? I think one of the things that's characteristic of the ICVCM process, and this I just want to like summarize and sort of point this out, is that ICVCM is making decisions at the methodology level, right? And multiple projects might use the same methodology. So what we're finding in our diligence, and I know you guys do this too, is that really sort of where the rubber meets the road on risk assessment is it's partly the methodology, but it's really how that project applies that methodology is really the determinant of sort of what the quality is for that project, right? It's not a methodological level assessment. It's definitely important, and this is just something for people to be aware of. Like, as a buyer, you should be looking at the individual project level and how it's applying that CCP-approved methodology. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, there's an analogy I use sometimes, maybe you've heard me say, but it's like baking a cake, right? The methodologies are the recipes. And you can craft a really good recipe. You can be a famous baker and have your own cookbook and have a really strong following and have produced the best possible recipe. But at the end of the day, if you make a misstep in actually baking that cake, it's not going to look good and it may not taste good. And the climate only cares if it looks good and tastes good from a carbon perspective. And so I think as methodologies and recipes get better and better, and it is very clear that they are, we are going through this rapid transformation. At the end of the day, it's what comes out the other end. It's what you deliver on the platter to your guests at your dinner party that determines how good that came out. And I think that's where the project level things come in.
Craig, do you want to jump in? We can just move on to.
Arguably on a number of levels. I think one of the things that we all have to remember as a first principle is we can't let perceived perfection be the enemy of the good. And that's frankly what's been ruling the market, and perhaps for justifiable reasons, as we've been discussing. But the market is shifting rapidly, and at the end of the day, what we've collectively managed to accomplish is to stifle capital investment in climate mitigation, the last outcome we wanted. And in the meantime, we're beyond frying our planet. Somehow we need to get corporates off the sideline, making those investments, recognizing that it's, some of those investments will not make all of us 100% satisfied, but the key then is to continue to retool the methodologies and the project approach so that, we make more progress over time. But the shock that I think a lot of companies are feeling, and if you go into any C-suite and say, I got an opportunity for you from it's coming from the sustainability department, $10 million, we can help us achieve net zero, and you're going to have protesters outside accusing you of greenwashing. First thing they say is, what's next on the agenda? And who can blame them? That's, voluntary commitment for that type of reaction, and that's not what we need right now. So, I've been working on GHG accounting for a long time, and frankly, folks, we've learned a lot. We know enough to move forward and get things done. It doesn't mean we can't improve. Every market improves along the way. But there's that's where I think the ICVCM is playing a key role by designating certain programs as, registries as CCP approved, and then doing a deeper dive at the methodological level and saying this methodology also reaches our CCP level. That should be sending a high degree of confidence to the market that those credits are of high quality, of high integrity. And questions around additionality or whether it's a ton is a ton shouldn't be accounting. We're always stressing a conservative approach in our methodologies that goes through the whole process. What does that mean? By the time you get to the point of issuing a credit, you've probably left a number of emission reductions on the table. And that's okay. That's the direction we want to bias things in. That rarely gets valued in the market these days. But as the CCP label hopefully starts to lead to frankly higher prices in the market, which it should, or anything, or an A rating or whatever is attached to the credit, sellers should command a higher price for that, and buyers should have a higher degree of confidence that they're getting what they want to get. Anyone who's thinks that they're not doing that should be constructive about the criticism and not just lob a grenade into the market. Now, some people will do that because they do not want to see market-based solutions survive. But I just challenge anybody to figure out at this day and age, what is our alternative right now? The public sector push on climate mitigation has been faltering seriously for decades now. And we should be under no illusions that it's going to change anytime soon. So the key missing ingredient is the private sector here. The optimism is that the solutions are staring us in the face. There are a lot of great projects out there. We know how to green electricity grids. We know we're learning how to green the transportation sector. There are credit projects that can go after landfills and livestock and forestry and other nature-based solutions. So it's a cost-effective toolbox that we've got right now. What we have after many decades of wondering what our choices were, what we have is a lack of will to make it happen.
Very good points. Jen, so Craig brought up this idea that the market should value. People should be willing to pay for this higher quality.
Right.
You're an aggregator of credits. You evaluate these credits. You actually sell these credits in a pool. Have you seen any, I would say, premium on CCP labeled credits? Have you changed your aggregation because of CCP?
Yeah. First, I just want to congratulate you, Craig. I want to know what you're going to do next, because I think you will be a fantastic advocate for the VCM and for climate action going forward. I hope we hear a lot more from you.
You very well might.
Yeah, that was amazing, and I couldn't agree more. Right? There's an urgency here that we need to keep in mind always. So your question was, are we sort of changing our purchasing strategy, right, based on CCPs? We're really proud, actually, because many of the credits that we had already bought and purchased as high quality got the CCP label while we owned them. So we were like, we're winning. We have, I think, the majority of our super pollutant credits, for example, got CCP tagged, and that was almost like, yeah, we knew they were good. So are they earning higher prices? Probably, right? I think we're selling them for a little more, maybe a little higher premium now than we were before. But, just for the record, those super pollutant credits, you guys, are amazing. They're effectively permanent, and they are, I say this every chance I get, and they're very cost effective, and they're super quantitative, and not, and high quality. So don't overlook your super pollutant category when you're sort of building your strategy. We definitely look at, we look at a number of things when we're making our decisions. We look at ratings, right, from BeZero and others. We look at CCP status. You know, a lot of the credits are still pending, right? Some of the methodologies have not yet been evaluated, and so some of them are still, you know, not yet ready. Yeah, we do look at them. They're not the only thing we look at, right? To the point earlier about project level diligence, we do a detailed dive on the project level, at the project level before we make any decisions, whether for spot credits or for investments.
Okay, so this is a question for all of you. And Craig, you kind of tip the scales on this. So why aren't people buying? Why is that capital sitting on the sideline? What is plaguing the market today? You can all
I think it goes back to what I was saying about the pushback, which I believe is often just downright unfair against corporates who are accused of greenwashing or buying low-quality credits. Clearly, we don't want to see that. But you know, again, one of my frustrations, having worked with a number of companies, understanding carbon is not their sweet spot, and it's likely never to be, nor should we expect companies to know that. The rest of us in the market need to make sure that, you know, when a company buys a credit, that they're not going to get castigated for it. I'm just saying flat out, and they shouldn't be. If you think that there's a mistake been made in some way, shape, or form in your mind, you know, in a positive, constructive way, point that out to whoever issued the credit or to the company that bought it. But you know, to blackball them or protest, like has happened in a number of cases, as I said, when we're talking about a significant capital commitment for any company, why should they spend that money for that level of abuse? That's not their mainline business, and if they think that that they should get into that, you know, we have to be supportive of that. And I think until we, you know, as a combination of having more clarity in the market through ICVCM and some of the rating agencies, hopefully we're giving buyers more credence, but we're also going to have to push back against the chicken little critics who don't, frankly, in most cases, know what they're talking about. Or they do, and they've got a nefarious agenda that they're not sharing with you. That's not helping any of us out. And you know, you can gauge my frustration that when you have hundreds of people involved in a public input process to determine what the final outcome should look like, and someone who doesn't even participate in it, you know, gets a negative article published about what you've been doing, you never get a chance to provide input to that, and they don't participate in yours. Why are they getting any press time at all?
Why aren't companies that have no net zero goals not being criticized?
Right.
That's a good question there, too.
Yeah.
I mean,
What do you think the problems are?
I think there's too much looking in the rearview mirror right now. I think the market has been through a bruising period, and we're all feeling the effects of that. But a lot has actually changed. I spoke to someone earlier who is a real expert in one particular sector in the market, but was kind of out of the market for a few years and came back and was telling me just how completely different it was from 5 years ago. All kinds of things, right? We have an ICVCM now. We have a VCMI. We have the standards bodies that are all rapidly evolving their methodologies, and we have developers that are beginning to transition projects into those methodologies. We have insurance agencies that have now created another piece of critical market infrastructure. And we have ratings agencies like ourselves that are providing this granularity and this information around risk so that it can be priced into the market. It's a very different market than it was a few years ago, and yet we're still responding to a lot of the negative criticisms, and all the things you know, Craig is talking about are very unfortunate. But there's a lot of good things on the horizon. There are some market signals. Getting back to the price question, we see very explicitly a price premium for higher rated projects. So we are now tracking, we track this every year. Last year was between 25 and 30% price premium for every notch on the BeZero scale that you increased. Say from a double B to a triple B, you could expect that. This year it's 40%. We just finished the 2024 data, and we now see a 40% on average price premium. We also see people retiring higher rated credits at twice the rate that they were before. It's now up to, it's 50% higher, 50% higher of the proportion of higher rated credits that are being retired. That's where the actual climate impact happens. So this price signal is starting to happen. We are seeing it particularly in bilateral relationships we have with individual corporates that we do pre-issuance ratings for that serve as due diligence for them. And they are most certainly paying higher premiums for projects that come out with higher ratings. So there are some good news stories in this market, and I think we are feeling a lot of the bruising past. But I would encourage us all to kind of look through the windshield instead of the rearview mirror at some of these activities.
Jen, you and I have talked about this, about the importance of cover, if you will, some kind of framework that a company can point to say, I did it the way they told me to do it. SBTi is part of that. VCMI is trying to do that. Are there other things out there? I mean, I think this framework, personally, I think a framework for how to do it right is something that's a bit of a challenge right now.
No, I think you're right. I think one of the things that's in the way right now with the frameworks, I think the frameworks are confusing for people. They're confusing for everybody, not just the buyers, right? They're confusing for the NGOs, and they're confusing for, for everybody. And I think because the frameworks are confusing, I think it's hard to come up with a really good use case, right, and a really clear and crisp use case, right? And I think SBTi and VCMI are trying to do that, but unfortunately, I think with some of the publications and materials and sort of conflicts and controversies that are coming out, it's like it makes it worse. People don't know, well, wait a minute, this guy said this and this person said that, and now how do I recognize, how to reconcile that? And if I do this, am I going to get on the front page of the newspaper? And that's really what I don't want. And I certainly don't want to spend money to be on the front page of the newspaper, especially not when my colleague, down the hall in a different company is doing nothing and not getting on the newspaper, right? So it feels like, somebody once said we should be like the companies that are actually doing this and stepping out and taking the risk, they're the ones that should be held up and celebrated, not punished, right? So that's kind of the issue. Can I talk a little bit about the claims, the sort of on the demand frameworks?
Sure.
Okay. I think we have, I want us to all be really clear about the difference between making a net zero claim, right, and a carbon neutrality claim, right? I think there are different kinds of claims out there for different kinds of applications for different kinds of claims, right? We've heard a lot of noise in the market lately about permanence and durability, and particularly sort of matching the permanence of your credit with the durability of your emission, right? And that's valid as long as the claim you're making is a net zero claim, right? And I can talk more about this offline.
She's a scientist.
But whatever. But but that's sort of like, that's important, right? But I think to make a carbon neutrality claim, what you're doing is something that's actually quite different. And you're basically holding yourself accountable for the emissions in your value chain. You're essentially taxing yourself, right? If you buy credits for your sort of ongoing emissions profile without necessarily buying credits to try to reach a particular target, if that makes sense. And so the companies that are sort of claiming carbon neutrality by purchasing credits to sort of cover their ongoing emissions, that's a very different use case, right? And we should be encouraging that kind of action because it's immediate and it's urgent, and you can buy, and nature-based credits are 100% appropriate, even on a temporary basis, 100% appropriate for that. And, I think, and that's exactly sort of what the VCMI Claims Code of Practice is intended to accomplish, as well as, by the way, the ISO 14068 carbon neutrality standard, which looks just like VCMI for those who are paying attention.
So a lot of the folks that are using these, they want somebody to do a third-party verification, have some proof of concept that I have met my carbon neutrality standard, that I have something to show for this effort, right? So right now, the standards out there that can be verified against, ISO neutrality is one of those. SBTi is another one. There's a couple of government programs that are coming down the pike. The Green Claims Directive in Europe could be at least important from a transparency. It's telling companies how to disclose, how to substantiate, how to prove up that claim. Because I think personally, this idea of greenwashing is mostly about not talking about what you're doing and how you're doing it. I think we need to I think transparency is super important. California has transparency laws actually passed. They'll be implemented January 2026, maybe. The EU has transparency requirements, CSRD. So those are designed to showcase what companies are actually doing. So I think actually we forget sometimes about the importance of transparency. And the registries have transparency. You can look at how those credits were actually created, how the methodology was updated. I think transparency is something that often is forgotten, but I think these frameworks provide that cover that companies are looking for just to take a step forward. Let me just move on from claims, if I can, for a minute. You brought up SBTi. How many people have actually read the SBTi framework that was just released? Oh my God, 133 pages, really dense.
I'd love to jump in here.
Please.
It's related to claims. It's related to SBTi. We're debating here in 2025, what the nomenclatures for different types of claims should be. SBTi is trying to define the gamut of emissions for companies to address. I don't even know why Scope 3 was ever assigned to any company. Any of you that have ever done any GHG accounting, for a lot of companies, Scope 1 and even Scope 2 is relatively straightforward. The amount of resources and energy and people you need to do Scope 3 is insane. And in the meantime, we've whitewashed the entire history for any company. What did they do the previous 10 years or 100 years, whatever it might be? There's a simple way to get it. I'm happy to have a sidebar conversation on that, but we need clarity to companies right now that, take your last 10 years of Scope 1 and 2, and that's your target is to mitigate that, or however you want to frame that. But this SBTi overlaying this complexity and then saying, well, for Scope 3 you can do this, or maybe 20% of that, but maybe not that. A ton is a ton is a ton. That's what we need now. And, we can continue to debate this for another decade or two, but that is in the rearview mirror. We've been doing that for decades. And we established corporate level accounting, as you know, back in the 90s. And are there refinements to be made? Of course. But, we need to unleash action right now. And these ongoing debates are one of the reasons, back to your earlier question, why companies are not deploying capital. The other, of course, is the Orwellian universe we live in. Any company right now is probably wondering if the White House tomorrow, if they took action on climate, is going to wonder whether the White House declares war on them. And that's just insane to say that, but we're seeing it in real time. They've weaponized the Justice Department and the executive to go after any federal-related programs, the consultants that support them.
This is supposed to be an uplifting conversation.
Also carbon markets.
Yeah, they totally are.
Hey, it's affecting carbon markets. You wonder why they're not deploying capital? That's going to be a key reason right now.
This is why this conference to me is so uplifting, because my life is all about policy. I lived in DC for a very long time, and it's so nice to be with people who actually believe in carbon markets, because we do, right? I'd like to, we've got a couple minutes here. I've got many more questions, but I would love to invite anybody who has a question from the audience. I can't see you, but I see a hand.
There's one.
Could you introduce yourself too, please? You want mine?
Hello.
Ooh, there you go.
Hey, this is my name is Lee. I'm with Wovoka. We're a project developer in the Philippines, and I feel like we're all kind of preaching to the choir. So I thought I'd throw a little bit of a grenade so we could shake things up a little bit. So you brought up the railroad analogy. I thought was really interesting that standards in the 1850s led to the proliferation of the railroads. But what that also led to is a proliferation in the largest ecocide and genocide in the history of this country, in the Native American buffalo and the communities there. And if we think about the rating agencies, right, we've raised $200 million between you and Silvera alone. You've rated 500 projects. Putting $200,000 per project in the beginning in early stage financing would do a lot more to meet the quality, right? Like the big problem of this market is actually the lack of financing at the earliest stages with the rating, the standards, setting the standards, what data do you need to prove the output, and putting the money towards there. And I think in some ways we're constructing a market that is going to have more the economics for the middlemen, for the financialization, versus actually like focused on the science and getting the job done with the communities.
That is a really great point. I think it's a very good question. And I guess I would answer that. Until there were ratings, you would be putting $200,000 into a lot of D-rated projects that were 100x overinflated the number of credits. You'd be putting $200,000 into projects that were simply not additional, and anybody that paid attention could tell that. You'd be putting $200,000 into projects that had significant humanitarian and non-carbon negative impacts in the communities. Now, instead, what you get to do is you get to put $1 million into the BBB projects, and you get to put $1 million into the A projects, and you get to put $50 million into the AAA projects. And so that is the virtuous cycle that more information and transparency of information should incubate in the market. And that's exactly what we see happening with the clients we work with who are directly going into projects that have reduced risks. It's not to say there shouldn't be some money going into those other projects, at least some of the middle tier projects, to be improving them over time and replicating the good parts and phasing out the bad parts. That's what a lot of the methodology improvements and ICVCM work is all about now. But before ratings, you wouldn't know which projects to put $200,000 into.
Do we have any more questions?
Can I just,
You wanna jump in?
yeah, do you mind? I think that, Spencer, I really appreciate that answer. I thought it was amazing. And I just, to address the theory of, what is the theory of change in the market, right? Like I agree, that is a huge problem, right? Not having early stage finance is a huge problem. We see it every day, right? But what unlocks early stage finance is demand at the other end. And so I would argue that what the ratings agencies are doing is providing the sort of groundwork and the infrastructure that will give buyers confidence to create the demand that will then sort of unlock the early stage finance for all kinds of projects, right, yours included. So I guess I think that's another piece of the puzzle.
Supply, we focus a lot on the quality and supply, but without demand, who cares? So demand to me is like pretty front and center these days. Any other questions? I can go on with questions, but I want to give you a moment. Okay, Spencer, back to you. Have you ever changed a rating? I'm just curious.
Oh, regularly, sure.
Yeah, how so? So somebody comes in and argues with you and you give them an A?
So, I do love to negotiate, but no, sadly, that's not how ratings work. So we consider our ratings to be live. They are updated regularly. They can be updated as frequently as new material information comes along. We get new information in a number of ways. Certainly, we rely on the registries to have reporting mechanisms into the registries, which we are tracking very carefully, and we're grateful to the work that the registries standards do. And that will cause us to review a project. And so there might have been some early D-rated projects, for example, that have decided that they might be priced out of the market. And so they're going to adapt to a new methodology. We're going to take a very fresh, hard look at that new project as it transitions to a new methodology. Or cookstove projects that change their FNRB, their fraction or non-renewable biomass, which is one of these really key characteristics of cookstove projects. As those things evolve through time, we're going to take another look at those projects. So our ratings are live. We do that regularly. Certainly when controversies blow up in the media, we would not change a rating immediately, but it would cause us to go investigate. We have what's called a ratings watch process, which is a standard thing that's been around for a long time in the credit markets, where when we receive new material information, we will put that rating on watch. We put that publicly on our platform, the free platform as well as the paid platform, and people can see that, oh, BeZero's taken another look, something is happening here. And then we go through the analytical work, we will come to a decision, and that rating can either be upgraded, downgraded, or it can remain the same. We call that reaffirming, and that gets published back out into the market, and the market can react to that information. One of the things, I alluded to this earlier, is we have learned a lot of the important infrastructure lessons of the credit markets because they've been around a long time. So that has a lot to do with the independence, how we operate, the firewall between our commercial team and our analytical team has to do with not getting involved in carbon credit transactions, not doing advisory work, et cetera. One of the things it means is we want to put out more and more transparency about this information. That's the key reason that our headline ratings are all public. We think that's important. Additionally, we are getting ready to publish the first ever ratings transition report in the carbon market. So we're nearly finished producing a look back at our last year and looking at the number of ratings that have changed over time and the degree to which they changed. This has not existed yet in the carbon market. And that report is going to show that there's been 90% stability in those ratings. So only 10% ratings have changed. And the vast majority of those only changed by one rating at a time. So up one or down one. And we will continue to track that indefinitely as a piece of transparency in the market. We're excited to actually release that. But we do think ratings should change. And that 90% is very comparable to what happens in the credit ratings that have, thousands or hundreds of thousands of companies being rated annually for decades.
I think this transparency, again, is super important. Craig?
The learning by doing that Spencer's talking about is critical across the market. We do that all the time at the Climate Action Reserve, both minor and major updates to all of the protocols. And that's simply out of the public process of learning by doing. That's critical to enhancing quality over time. We're all going to learn more. But the important thing, again, is to get started. In the broad scheme of things, we are at, I think, a takeoff point in the voluntary market. There's been a lot of good things happening that are clarifying for buyers out there how to find quality. The supply obviously needs to expand tremendously. That's a chicken and egg problem. I'm often asked, why isn't the supply bigger? Well, no one wants to create an oversupply of credits. Who wants to invest in that? Who's going to buy them if there's not a buyer? So we obviously need supply and demand to be enhanced, but I can tell you from the demand side, the way I'm looking at it, and over the next few years, we're going to see tremendous growth. And if the buyer community globally jumps into this, it's really going to start to make a difference, and it needs to make a difference. So, I'm optimistic on that front. We just simply need to quit wasting time.
Yeah, there's something about the time value of carbon that really needs to be more front and center about.
How about time value of civilization?
Well, okay, we're just okay. So I just have to come back to you, Spencer, one more time. So there's a few rating agencies out there. So the Silvera, there's Alex Global, you guys, and I know that you don't always agree. How do you explain the difference between the different rating agencies? And so we have, Moody's, as you started with, Moody's is actually regulated. Yeah. So you can go and you can see how they decide on their ratings. Can you talk a little bit about what do you think about regulating, sure, and what do you think about the difference between the different agencies?
Yeah, we are not afraid of regulation in our market. In fact, we welcome that for the ratings industry. For this market to truly scale, we've heard a lot of examples of why this market needs to scale from an urgency perspective and from a climate perspective, 100%. The only way that is truly going to scale to the degree that we need it to matter for the globe is if this eventually becomes a highly functioning, well-understood, predictable, more or less predictable market, and that is likely going to involve some regulation. That is true of the public debt markets, where the ratings idea comes from, and we expect that will be true here as well. And so that's why from the very beginning, and I've said this a couple times, we have set ourselves up to follow the best practices. It's about the transparency. It's about putting out reports about how much transition there's been. It's about not having conflicts of interest, and we have a good thought piece on our website about that. All our methodologies are public, so you can go and see our risk framework across all sectors. You can also look if you're interested in cook stoves or you're interested in improved forest management or renewable energy. You can go look at the specific methodology and how we think about these different risk factors and how we evaluate them. So we see no issue with regulation. We expect it to come eventually, and we are prepared for that, and we've been aligning ourselves from the beginning.
So thanks for letting me pick on you for a minute. I have to say, I think that we all know that we need a voluntary carbon market that we can trust. Buyers need a market they can trust. The planet needs a market that has buyers. So we need a functioning voluntary market that really enables projects that truly protect the environment, that that reduce, avoid, and remove emissions from the atmosphere. We need those projects to be providing finance for those projects that really need to get off the ground. That's what the voluntary market does. It provides finance. I don't think there's enough money in governments in the world to do the things that the voluntary market can do if we could just get it unlocked. So I for one see that these standards have improved the market. I think there's still a ways to go. And I think Jen said it best when she said we need to embrace change. And I know at Anew we've been taking looks at different methodologies that we use. I think we all need to embrace that change and keep being a voice for the importance of this market. So I want to thank the panel for, I think, hopefully it was a lively conversation. I hope I didn't pick too much on Spencer.
Can I just say a quick
Please,
thing?
please do. We have 38 seconds.
I want to just say a quick thank you to Craig and his Climate Action Reserve colleagues for building this community of practice. You have stepped down from this leadership role that you've held, and I think this is one of the highest densities of really good information of people that are really active and know what they're talking about. And that's a big testament to you and the legacy you're leaving behind. So I just want to say thank you to that for this community of practice at NACW.
Hear, hear. Thank you all. I hope you have a good rest of the conference.